Hello people of the internet, welcome to Paint to Life, the YouTube channel where I take tiny plastic miniatures, give them my best attempt at a paint job, then breathe life into them with storytelling, like a dungeon master should. Today I'm assembling and painting my first WizKids frameworks while discussing the Mind Flayer, as selected by my YouTube community tab. And hey, if you enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, click that bell to be notified when my new content is released. I'm GM Atank, let's get painting. So, what is a Mind Flayer? Also known as illithids, they're horrific alien humanoids known for their powerful psionic abilities that lurk deep within the Underdark, the vast network of underground caverns and tunnels underneath the surface of Faerun. They use their mental powers to dominate other creatures. The fortunate among their victims are slain, their brains devoured. The unlucky ones have their psyches warped, leaving them as mindless slaves with little hope of being rescued. Mind Flayers use the brains of such creatures as food, of course, but they also need sentient humanoids to propagate. See, Mind Flayers don't reproduce in the traditional sense. They lay eggs, which hatch tadpole-like creatures that are used to make more of their kind through a process called Metamorphosis. That's the one we're going to go with. A newly hatched tadpole is inserted into the victim's cranium, usually through a nostril or ear canal. Over the course of a week, the humanoid body changes form, and a new Mind Flayer comes into being. Mind Flayers use telepathy to communicate with each other and with other creatures. Among their own kind, they form a network of minds. Each Mind Flayer is an individual node of the network, taking on specific tasks, sharing information, and so on. At the center of this network is the Elder Brain. If a single Mind Flayer in a colony sees or hears something, the Elder Brain and the rest of the illithids in the colony learn of it immediately. In the lair of a Mind Flayer colony, the safety and security of its residents is all important. As a result, illithid lairs are always well hidden, well defended, and almost always underground, but within easy reach of humanoids and their succulent brains. Mind Flayers sometimes preserve extracted brains in a magical liquid. These brains, still fully alive, are kept in the brain chamber. The Mind Flayers use these brains to advance the study of how psionics affect their enemies. They also enjoy the babble of confused, horrified thoughts that emanate from these brains. So, what's the story of our Mind Flayer tonight? A muscular human, Edgar, was skulking through a cave network heading deeper underground. The cave walls were smooth and naturally formed, and in some spots, Edgar had to slow to a shuffle to pass through, his large greatsword scraping along the wall with a metallic sound that reverberated loudly. Edgar had been looking for his wife, who had seemingly wandered this way. Suddenly, around a corner, Edgar found himself standing within arm's reach of an alien-looking creature out of Nightmare that was gently levitating about a foot from the floor. An octopus-shaped cranium with purplish skin held two orange eyes which shone with great intellect. It donned an ornate breastplate with flowing blue robes, carried a tall bone staff, and had 4 tentacles writhing over its mouth. Before Edgar could move a muscle, the creature lifted a hand, and there was a cacophony of noise in Edgar's head that sounded like static and whispers. "Obey," he heard, as his sword arm became unresponsive to his reflexes. A memory flashed before Edgar. A beautiful sunset over the plains of his farmhouse with his wife Remora. That was the evening the strange human came passing through. Always looking out for the needy, Remora offered the traveler room and board for the evening. Edgar awoke that night to the sight of the very same stranger dropping a kind of squirming tadpole into his sleeping wife's hair that promptly burrowed deep into her left ear. The enraged husband moved to defend his wife, and despite its desperate pleas, Edgar strangled that stranger, breaking his neck with his bare hands. Remora was shaken, but appeared unharmed from the ordeal, but Edgar could not seem to retrieve the tadpole from deep within her ear canal. Now, not knowing the nature of such a bizarre act, the two left their house that very day to go to the city of Athkatla for assistance. Back in the cave, the lamenting Edgar's fury with those memories broke whatever psionic control the creature used to hold him, allowing him full control of his body again. He landed a wicked slash with his greatsword, partially bouncing off the creature's breastplate. With a shriek, the Mind Flayer fled up, towards the ceiling, levitating up a vertical tunnel overhead, raining drops of black blood below. Edgar sheathed his sword on his back and began, with great difficulty, to scale the vertical shaft. His head throbbed from the mental assault that he had endured, and tears were in his eyes, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. This creature must have been responsible for his wife's disappearance, he reasoned. Once at the top of the shaft, and exhausted, Edgar again drew his weapon and pressed onward. Unexpectedly, a powerful blast of energy knocked him, unbalanced, and backwards a bit. Disoriented, he dropped to a knee and saw the creature ahead of him, a mere 15 feet, its long purple fingers pressed to its temples, when another blast of psionic energy manifested and struck Edward backwards, even further, closer to the edge of the vertical shaft. A memory flashed before him. Remora's beautiful face was mottled and bleeding from sores. Clumps of hair and some of her teeth were falling out. She was coughing up blood. The couple had been traveling for almost a week and were only one more day away from the city of Athkatla, where they might have received help. Another blast knocked Edgar back almost to the precipice, and the Mind Flayer floated closer towards him, its face tentacles writhing in anticipation of victory. Feeling defeated, Edgar's thoughts turned to his wife and his perception of their last night together. He was positive that Remora had got up, unnoticed, and fled that night, abandoning him at their campsite all alone. In the morning, anguished, he tracked her, found her discarded clothes, and followed her down to these very caves. Nevertheless, not too far past the entrance, he found her lifeless body, clawed tentacle marks around her face, and a rough hole punched in her empty skull. Her entire brain was missing. Thoughts of his slain wife were too much for him to bear. His head throbbed. He heard the static and whispering noises of the Mind Flayer, who was almost upon him. 2 single tears fell down from his eyes and ran down his cheeks. "Not today!" He, enraged, rose and with all his might landed a critical strike on the creature. His greatsword sliced a wicked gash, taking 3 tentacles from its face. The creature gurgled in horror as Edgar grabbed it from the air by the breastplate and slammed it into the floor with a loud thud. Elated, he grabbed it at the neck to strangle the life from the evil being. That was until it unexpectedly disappeared from his hands. Invisible, perhaps, he frantically got up and ran ahead through the caves after the escaping creature. Edgar ran, whining and turning through an almost organic, maze-like complex of stone tunnels, all the while a deep, distant laughter was audible. Winding, turning endlessly, he began to feel like he was being constricted now, and the laughter was intensifying. It was only when Edgar, breathing heavily, stopped running that he remembered the actual events of the last night with his wife together. She hadn't gotten up unnoticed by him after all. He didn't follow her tracks to the caves. He didn't find her lifeless, brainless body. Fear entered his heart as more of the real memory returned to him. In this actual memory, he knew something was terribly wrong. He didn't want to wake up and face his wife. But this was a recollection after all. This had already happened. Nothing could change it now. He opened his eyes slowly. Standing before Edgar, near the embers of their campfire, was what used to be his wife, but now, tattered clothes at her feet, the illithid tadpole had completely transformed her body into that of a Mind Flayer. Paralyzed with terror, the Mind Flayer grappled with Edgar's body as its slimy tentacles wrapped tightly around his forehead and neck. In this memory, Edgar had called aloud his wife's name one more time. "Remora!" "Not Remora anymore. Drusus now." An otherworldly voice boomed in his head. Edgar screamed. In the dark cave complex, a mile or so underground, the Mind Flayer, recently born from the Metamorphosis of Remora, hovered, holding and inspecting the still-living, tortured brain of Edgar, whose anguished dreams and memories were both familiar and yet gleefully satisfying. Drusus, the Collector. Alright, what did you think of my story of Drusus, the Illithid? Here is the finished Frameworks Mini for the shelf. If you would like to watch my review of this Frameworks miniature, as well as how I painted and assembled the mini, you can find the link at the end of this video or in the description below. If you're interested in getting your hands on some of these Frameworks miniatures, head on down to your friendly local gaming store and put in a pre-order for one. The street date is March 2022. Tell them GM Atank sent you and pass along my channel to anyone else you think might enjoy it. Also, if you're from the Niagara area, know that we'll be hosting an assembling and paint night to promote the launch of Frameworks at Phoenix Rising in St. Catharines. Stay tuned to the channel for more information as that date gets closer. That's all I have for you tonight. I'll see you next time. I'm GM Atank. Wash your hands, people. Check.